This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Maura Donley, an associate of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. My usual co-host, is Charlie Greenwald, and he is on assignment today. So I'm really very happy to have Jere Strittmatter here with us. Jere is a board member of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Welcome, Jere.
Thank you very much,
Are
Maura.
you having a good summer so far?
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I look forward to learning a lot today from
good.
Dr. Mash and others.
We will. We have, as our first guest today, we have Ken Mash, who is the president of APSCUF and a professor at East Stroudsburg University. And APSCUF has a lot going on right now, I understand. Reports being written, things happening. Right. You've been busy.
Yeah, well, first of all, Maura, it's great to be here again. We've been in a situation where the state system of higher education, which runs the 14 publicly owned universities in Pennsylvania, they did a self-study, which cost about $400,000 to do, looking at how they could do what they do better, given the fact that there has been some decline in enrollments at some of our universities, and that some of our universities are in financial difficulty. They came back with a report with several instructions, but yet some people in the legislature were not satisfied with that, so they commissioned another study for $250,000. They wound up hiring the Rand Corporation to do a study, and they came back with additional recommendations.
So now we have two competing studies with competing recommendations. Where do things stand? What's happening?
Well, from the perspective of my colleagues, the faculty and coaches in the state system, particularly the Rand study was one where the legislature and those people who were proposing it were really very critical, even in the questions they were asking of the universities. And so they phrased their original question in the sense of, how long can we continue to support struggling universities, which is a loaded question. Yeah. From the very start. And I think that sort of framed the approach that Rand took to the study, where they were not looking for necessarily ways to bolster the system or to make it sustainable, but were rather looking for ways to really kind of tear it apart. And I think that's why you wound up with the results that you did from Rand, which really talked about either closing universities or moving them over to one of the state-related universities and things of that sort. I think what gets lost in all this conversation is the fact that we have at all 14 of our universities, every single day, we have students succeeding, we're graduating students, the state system is awarding more degrees than it's ever awarded before, even with fewer students, or we're getting more students through. We're getting them to degrees, they're successful, they go on to get great jobs, and that's true at all 14 of our universities. And what's shocking to me mostly is that you have two entities doing studies, and both of which ignore the major problem with the system. And that's something I've talked about here before, which is essentially we had an 18% cut in 2011 to our funds. Mm-hmm. The universities have been struggling ever since. They're supposed to be publicly owned. Pennsylvania is 47th out of 50 states when it comes to per capita funding for public higher education. The U.S. News & World Report ranked Pennsylvania 50th for higher education, largely because of the cost of college and the debt burden that's placed on students. This is an unsustainable situation, not that came out because the universities are failing. It's because our universities have essentially been starved. And they've done the best that they could to this point. We will continue, I think, to do everything that we possibly can to help our students along, but this is certainly not the best situation. And frankly, the universities that suffer the most are those universities that are in the areas of the Commonwealth where the students can least afford expensive education. And that's part of the problem with the enrollment numbers, is that you raise the cost for housing, for tuition, for fees, and you're going to wind up pricing people out of a college education.
And I think anytime you have an audit, people always worry about audits and having people review you because what do they get paid for? To find problems. Mm-hmm. And so it's always said on the negative of coming up with a list of things, because why did you hire them? If everything's rosy, then they didn't justify themselves. And they'd like to come in and follow up on the points that they made. So that's, I think, sort of standard. And I believe if you ask the people around the Commonwealth, I know I live close to one Millersville, and everyone in communities across the state think they're wonderful. You know, they're really economic engines, you know, for the community. They're involved with the community. The students are involved with the community. But when we're blessed in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, you know, not only highways, but also education, we have so many different alternatives, you know, competing with that. And in good times that we have now, people can afford to go other places. So there's a whole lot of things to look at this, but I believe that, you know, just because there's a report out, you know, it doesn't mean that people should, you know, run for the hills. I think we should just, you know, go through and see how valuable they are and look at them as economic engines, you know, for our communities and why we are doing well. Don't you think that's something that we should be doing rather than concentrating on something that some educators are telling us about or some study people are telling us?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, you know, and I tell my colleagues and remind them of the fact that we're academics, we should not be afraid of studies. And even there are things that could be done better, and we believe that there are things that could be done better at our universities. But it's quite clear that, you know, study after study that comes out shows the benefits of a college education for individuals, how much more you make over the course of your lifetime, regardless of what your major is, that people wind up happier with a college degree. It just points to the fact that that is something that has to remain accessible. We could have all the colleges in the world in Pennsylvania, but if we don't have options for working class people to actually attend in an affordable way, it doesn't matter how many universities you have, they're just not going to be able to go. And when you look at the data, the actual data that was ignored, frankly, by these studies, which shows that we are below the national average in, as far as students filling out FAFSA forms even, and other kinds of financial aid things. And, you know, I suspect, and I don't have the evidence for this, but I suspect that for a large swath of the population, particularly in the northern tier, and as you get out west, maybe hopping over Allegheny County, that it just is not even imaginable as an option for many students. And not only that, we have in Pennsylvania a situation where we rank 40th as far as the number of adults with a college degree. And I think over half our counties are below the 50th state when it comes to the number of adults with a college degree. If we're going to look forward to the future and try and attract employers who are going to come here, they're going to be looking for an educated population. And we have to do better. The universities have to do better. The Commonwealth needs to do better as far as providing access.
I know Maura's going to have the next question, but I just want to interject something right there. Well, those figures can be skewed very much because where do senior citizens in the United States go? They go to Florida or Pennsylvania, right? And so when you're looking at, you know, the people that don't have college degrees, you know, I think we should eliminate the seniors and start taking a look at, you know, at that different population. And when you just look at per capita,
seniors, you mean
in the data, because I know, you know, once again, we don't tax annuities or pensions in Pennsylvania. That's great. And what does that do? That brings everybody from New York, Connecticut, any place that taxes annuities and pensions, brings them to Pennsylvania. I don't want to tax annuities and pensions. I think our retirement homes are great, but, you know, we have a great concentration of that. But just listening to you, if they're putting the data, you know, per capita, you know, and looking at that, yeah, a lot of 90-year-olds might not have gone to college, and I don't think they're going to now. And so we shouldn't be penalized for that, don't you believe?
I agree, and I would be really interested in seeing that data. I mean, I've heard a lot of arguments about over time about people migrating from state to state because of these financial things. I've heard those arguments before, but usually when the data comes in, it's shown that it's not really accurate. It's much more difficult to move because of financial incentives.
My legislative district had 11 big nursing homes.
Well, I think that you're more likely. I mean, that's a phenomenon not just in Pennsylvania, but across the country that we have an aging population. So that number would be reflected not just in Pennsylvania, but across the entire country. And so I would be interested in seeing that data. I don't know anyone who's backed that up with actual numbers in comparison to other states. But the reality is that you've got universities that are engines for their communities. You've got, again, if we are going to be attracting businesses and companies to come here, we need to educate our population. In fact, if you look at the latest study from Penn State, which talked about migration and the fact that Pennsylvania's population grew actually last year, despite the predictions that it would go down. But if you look at the areas where it did grow, in Philadelphia, in State College, in Pittsburgh, it's places which are well known for having colleges and universities that are going to attract companies and which are going to have jobs. What we need to do is to make sure that we're providing those opportunities around the Commonwealth, and we should be especially concerned about places like Clarion, Pennsylvania, Mansfield, Pennsylvania, California, Pennsylvania, places where people are struggling and the people there need opportunities.
So what's next?
Well,
What's going to happen now? We've got competing studies all over the place. We're right in the middle of budget season. What's going to happen?
Well, I hope that this is not just that these studies aren't cause for, as you were suggesting, for sort of knee-jerk reactions to things. That they are opportunities to engage in conversations like the one that we're having here. And I also hope that, we have a new chancellor who's going to be starting. It seems to me that it would be really unfortunate for the legislature to be taking any kind of action before you have the new chancellor come in and have an opportunity to engage and to learn. The person who's coming, work for the Gates Foundation, is very up on higher education and changes and really getting the most for the money and helping students graduate and has that as a concern.
And we only have a couple minutes left, but I'd like to hear what all the good things are that are happening in the 14 schools now, in the last couple minutes.
Yeah, like I said, every day we have students who are graduating, winning awards around the country. We have new programs that are popping up in graduate programs in healthcare, but also providing sound foundation in the liberal arts and humanities. And like I said, our students graduate, they get jobs, they help the Commonwealth, and most importantly, from our universities, our students stay in Pennsylvania. So what we are really doing is helping the Commonwealth in every possible way.
And so many are coming back too to be re-educated into the new jobs.
Right.
That's a big portion too, right?
Mm-hmm. So what's your predictions on budget season?
Well, our hope is the governor, recommended there be $15 million added to the state system's budget. We're still hopeful that that's the case. Okay. I think you probably hear the same things that I do, that there's sort of a desire on everyone's part to get the budget done as soon as possible. I have my doubts because I think I hear that every year.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful too that will happen and that we'll have a solid budget for the Commonwealth.
And collections are looking pretty good so far.
Yeah.
So, well, Ken, we want to say thank you so much for being here today, and we'll hope to have you back to continue discussing the competing studies that are out there, and wish you the best as you work hard for your organization.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Doing a great job, thanks.
We'll be right back with the next segment of Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back. On this segment, Jerry and I are going to talk about some transportation issues. And there's nobody better than our expert, Bob Latham, Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. Welcome.
Good to hear. Yeah, good to be here with both of you.
Thanks.
You. Yeah.
It's that time of year. A lot of stuff going on the roads. Your members are very busy, keeping us safe.
Well, I mean, one thing to remember is we have 4 seasons here in Pennsylvania, and I'm not going to get into the joke that if there's winter and then there's pothole season, but we do have that. And interestingly enough, we had a very rough winter. I think the freeze thaw. We might have said, well, it wasn't that particularly cold. Didn't seem like we got a lot of snow. I think we had more snow in April than in the history of Pennsylvania, and what that does with the freeze thaw, obviously, it caused a lot of wear and tear on the highways. So the governor announced recently an initiative to spend an additional $20-some million just making sure that the potholes are repaired and people can get around. So we're doing a lot of work there. But of course, also just the regular construction season goes from about April 15th and through November. So we're hot and heavy into it.
Yeah.
Got a number of projects that are being built and worked on out there, fixing bridges.
And we were fortunate, several years ago, thanks to your leadership and many others, to have the funding there in order to take care of our roads and to keep them safe.
Right.
Where a lot of other places don't have that.
Exactly. A lot of people in the General Assembly stood up for us and stood up for the infrastructure. It's an issue that's been talked about at the national level. It doesn't seem to be getting much impetus lately, but we did it here in Pennsylvania, and it's also important to understand that not just at the state level, not just PennDOT, but a lot of that money went down to the municipalities. So a lot of your local roads and bridges are getting more attention as well. So we're seeing improvements everywhere. And of course, it was a multimodal program. So our transit systems, which we like to point out, there is public transit in all 67 counties in Pennsylvania, not just our urban counties. They're able to do a lot of work and a lot of upgrades and additional service as a result of that.
And the safety for the school children too, is phenomenal. We had so many bridges that were dangerous, and then we had so many detours that the kids were on longer over less safe roads. And then now there's been thousands of bridges that have been corrected because of
and buses on rural roads. We're able to improve the safety on our rural roads, so those rural school districts and the buses are much safer than they had in the past. So it's all
thinking of safety. The work zone safety, I find that it's very nice that your members and everyone dealing with the transportation industry allows these roads to be open. It used to be years ago you'd have a detour for 6 months, 9 months. Now we're working at night. They're working during the day, letting traffic flow.
Well, Jere and Maura, it's important to understand that all the work, almost all of the work that's being done as a result of this 4-year-old funding bill is on existing roads, rehabilitating existing roads and existing systems. We're not building a lot of new highways or new facilities in previous greenfields or what have you. There are a couple of major projects like that. Susquehanna Valley Expressway. I think we're starting to see some work on 322 bypass into State College. Those are kind of few and far between. So we have to work. Our members, who I represent, the construction companies who are doing these projects, have to work under traffic, which makes the engineering tricky, and of course it makes it dangerous for highway workers. And one of the biggest problems that we see is that motorists simply refuse to slow down through highway work zones. It's a danger to themselves, but it's a danger to the people who are working out there.
I travel through Maryland, and they really have a great system. Can you tell us more about that? Because it seems to be working really well now.
Yes, Maryland several years ago implemented a statewide automated speed enforcement authority. And in the vernacular, that means that there is a camera taking a picture, a speed camera taking a picture of you as you go through a highway work zone. Now, people would say, well, that could be an entrapment, or I wouldn't know. Well, first of all, they post every site where these are on the web. They publicize that.
I just drove down through one. It's well marked that there's going to be a camera.
Signage all the time. Exactly. Yeah. If you're paying attention,
yes.
You absolutely know that it is. The other thing is, if it's marked if it's an interstate, and let's say they dropped the speed from 70 or 65 to 55 through the work zone, you still have a grace period. So I mean, there's really no excuse for going more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit,
it's a 12-mile-an-hour grace.
Grace period. So grace time. Yeah. So in any event. But what we've seen as a result of that is, and you went through one of these in Maryland, the speeds go down precipitously as they approach the highway, and that's what we're trying to do. Some critics have said, well, it's just a money raiser. Well, it's not really. The experience in Maryland has been less and less revenue from these fines generated, which is good,
And they
because
only
that's
charge
what we want to do.
$40, right? So
Right.
it doesn't
It's a
matter
40
how fast you were going, it's a $40
It's a $40 fine.
flat-
There are no
flat fee.
points and that sort of
Fine,
thing.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, after a while, that gets to eat your wallet a little bit,
Yeah.
and hopefully, and what we're seeing in Maryland, it's having the effect that we're trying to see. They're not raising much money for the state. People are slowing down. It's much safer through work zones there. We had out in Pittsburgh, a big project out there on 79. We've clocked numerous motorists at more than 100 miles an hour through the work zone. It's just unbelievable, and we have to
More than 100?
more than 100 miles an hour several
gosh.
times. It's really a bad situation, and so we think that this is important legislation, and hopefully the General Assembly will pass it.
Yeah, because those people they're probably impaired. They're probably there's probably some other things about why they're
Could
doing it,
be, yeah.
like suicide. But the number of accidents that we have, with your members, I think it's like 84% have had accidents in their work zones. And the thing is, those workers are hurt, but it's all the other people are driving with their families. When they leave in the morning, they want to be able to come home. The nice thing about Maryland is, like a mile or two beforehand, people are slowing down. So those people are going to go 100 miles an hour. They're not going to be able, to do that because they're already going to be, slowed down by everybody else who's driving much more reasonably.
So we think it's a right of highway workers to have a safe environment, and anything we can do to slow them down using today's technology should be included.
And hopefully it'll pass. What's your prediction on that? It's something that is before Pennsylvania
It's gaining a lot of
legislature
momentum.
and
It's been a slow go. Change is never easy in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There are some pockets of resistance to it. Some folks who think that, it abridges my rights. I should have a police officer there, if I'm going to be charged with a speeding offense. Well, the police can't be everywhere. This is to augment what we can do with our Pennsylvania State Police on major roads.
So many more important things to do.
Well, really slowing people down. It seems like it's getting worse and worse. A national survey by the Associated General Contractors just noted that 54% of construction companies are seeing huge amounts of dangerous situations in their work zones. So this is a national phenomenon, and hopefully we'll be able to follow Maryland's lead here and get something done in Pennsylvania.
And it's not just because I know you, but I do slow down in those work zones. Didn't get a ticket, but I do have a question for you. Is there a difference in Maryland and or in Pennsylvania between an active work zone and an inactive work zone? It might be evening where nothing's happening.
Well, in Pennsylvania right now, the fines are doubled if you actually get caught speeding in a work zone today.
Any active, inactive, doesn't matter.
Well, it's a higher fine if it's active than an inactive. Today in Pennsylvania, this bill would sort of do away with that whole bifurcated system, and the fines would be leveled whether it's active or inactive. And really, the theory is this: it's just as dangerous when there are not workers present to motorists. You're just as much of a danger to your other fellow citizen who's trying to drive through that work zone if you're speeding and lose control of your vehicle. And we have to shift the lanes, because if we're working on one lane, you have to have people over on another lane. The other thing is, of course, some folks complain about, well, there's nobody working out there. Well, concrete takes time to cure. And we can't all be standing. It's not productive for workers to be standing around watching it cure. So
people would complain about that too.
Definitely.
They're all just standing around.
Standing around watching the paint dry, so to speak. But,
it's been very expensive to make all the roads safer, but people are sort of used to really driving, it's 2 lanes, but it's actually 4 lanes.
Right.
So they're used to driving on 4 lanes, and then all of a sudden, they're down to actually 2 lanes, and they don't know how to do that. And so, we really do need it. But in your answers to that, talking about the state police and being there about more important things they can do, and we're talking about the budget season now, which is always complicated. I know it's a year-round process, but the year-round process, with the dollars that were raised to repair our roads, keep them safer, being taken away and given to other state police functions that aren't really associated with highways, that should really come out of the general fund. Give us an update on that. I remember we talked to you before, and that's been a problem because that was growing.
Well, fortunately, in 2016, the General Assembly enacted some language in the budget there, what they call the fiscal code, which put a cap on that, and then a 10-year walk back to a reasonable level. There are highway patrol efforts that go on by the state police that are safety related, so that is being, I guess, slowly pared back, and I think that schedule is going to be met again this year.
Great.
In 2017, actually, the General Assembly sort of upped the ante a little bit and moved it back even further than what the law said it had to move back, 4% a year. They went a little higher than that. I think we're going to be at the 4% this year because we're looking at getting a budget done on time and a lot of other education spending priorities. I know that school safety is and looking at money for school safety is a very something that they're looking at. So we're not looking for a big boost in that rollback, if you will, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But we are looking to keep this. It's not increasing, and we're staying on schedule.
Because the number of roads that Pennsylvania has, state roads, higher than all New England, New York,
exactly.
and the local roads are higher than any other state too. And so every dollar that gets shifted out of keeping those safe is a dollar lost.
That's
and especially if we're matching against federal dollars, it could be a 90-10 or an 80-20 match that really hurts us. So I'm glad to hear
if we were somehow
that the General Assembly is doing the right thing and paring that back.
So I think we're on a right track. We of course would like to see it move faster, but as long as the fact that it's not getting disrupted is a good thing from the budget standpoint.
In our last minute, what other issues are your members concerned about? I know you meet with them yearly, and what else are they?
Well, the construction industry, just like everybody else, I mean, we're at full employment in the country. I mean, the economy is chugging along. We're at full employment. We need more people. So I think looking at kind of our looking at our education system, maybe our system of higher education. I know that there have been some proposals to look at how can we use the state higher education system to sort of match with trade schools, so you get a college degree while still coming out with a skill. Skilled workers, we could really use that. And the other thing, kind of like a looming on the horizon that we're looking at, is this whole portion of the funding bill where the Pennsylvania Turnpike tolls were being used for public transit that's being challenged by a lawsuit. Could be a problem in the near future.
Well, we want to thank you so much for being here and keeping us informed on all things transportation. Thanks everyone for being with us. We'll see you next time on a new edition of Behind the Headlines.